This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to tonight's Storyworks Roundtable. We are talking about point of view, specifically first-person point of view. So, it's a big topic. Let's start with opening thoughts. I'm just going to keep it really general. And then we'll get the ball rolling and dig in. Kathryn?
I think this has been used a lot lately in young adult fiction, specifically like a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction. The young adult series have just exploded, and first person seems to be their point of view of choice. I've read a lot of them until I got tired of all the same tropes and stopped reading them. But I think it's really useful in that specific genre. I really appreciate it because I think what it does is it takes the distance between the character and yourself sometimes and just, and takes it away. And so you're living every single moment. They also use present tense a lot, but first person just narrows that gap and brings you right in with them, right into their thoughts. And it's for things like that, especially post-apocalyptic and adventure stories and things where you're on this ride with the character and you want to know exactly how they're feeling and where their emotional ups and downs are. It's really, really useful tool.
So you said you got tired of all the same tropes. So do you think it's being overdone?
I think there are a lot of them. There's a lot of all sorts of genres that have tropes like that. If you allow yourself to read only one genre for a length of time, and then sometimes you can get a little inundated with it. And when you start guessing what's happening before it happens, because you're like, oh, and now this is going to happen. I just had to take a break.
Yeah.
We'll say.
Yes. Okay. Now I want to ask you if the books are formulaic, but I think I'm going to move over.
But
yes, but right. But if that's what you like and that's what your favorite genre offers. Okay.
Right,
so
exactly. I think a lot of genres are like that.
True. Robert, your book is first person. So
yeah, and it's challenging, I think, to write. And for me, I know not all authors believe that. Some have specifically told me it's their preferred writing style, and I agree with Kathryn. Having reviewed 60 young adult books with Brian, and one of the things we came to conclude is that first person present tense is unbelievably popular in that particular. And it's I wouldn't even say young adult YA is a genre per se, because it could be in any genre, but it's a convention of that market for sure. And the big ones, the Twilights, the Hunger Games, etc. When I first started reading them, I hated it. I'd not read much first person present tense, and part of my own training in neurolinguistics made me think this is a peculiar style, because it's forcing me to adopt this persona, and it's saying, I'm running through the forest and I hear a sound behind, but I'm not. I'm lying here reading. I don't understand. And so it split me until I became able to, I suppose probably just let go and become, and as Kathryn says, there's no closer point of view. It's okay. It's me.
There's so much going on right now on the table. You guys have brought up so many interesting, wonderful things. So
can I just you just asked me about mine, and so
right, I thought you were going to talk about your book, but now we're
I am. I will, not in depth. Really quickly, just because it closes that loop, and I'll come back to you. One of the books that we read was Red Rising by Pierce Brown, which is science fiction, but in book one the protagonist is 16, so it falls into YA. And actually, unusually, he's 22 by the time you get to book 3. But he starts out that way, and it's first-person present tense. And I started reading it after reading a really good, fast-paced third-person past young adult, which is also sci-fi. I think it was Legend by Marie Lu. And that was fabulous. And all of a sudden, I literally finished that one, and then within minutes started this next one because of the number of books we were reading. And I was quite jarred by it, but within a page, he had me. And it was so wonderfully written, and it was so inspiring to read science fiction in that voice, because science fiction is so dead set against first person present tense. There is first person past, but dead set against first person present tense. They tend to think of it as whiny YA. And so you've got to be very careful to not offend the readers. So I thought, well, I'm going to write a new science fiction series. I'll choose first person present tense. Yeah.
Right.
Was that to snub the conventions?
No, it was because I was inspired by Pierce Brown, and I really liked the fact that he had a very strong male protagonist and quite a lot of strong females in it. And I thought that there's room for the readership. If you look at a lot of his readers are female, there's a great deal, I would have thought, of reader desire for more of the same, but maybe with a female protagonist. And I love writing female protagonists. So I thought, okay, well, I'll try it in a short story and see what the response is like. And the response was great, and it taught me about writing that first person, which I'd never done before, and first person present tense. And there's so much that you can't do that if you're used to writing third person.
Right.
Anyway.
Right. Okay. So before we continue the conversation, I just want to say that you've referred to Brian, that's Brian Cohen, and reviewing the books that was on your show, The Split, right?
Defunct. Yeah.
What? Say that again?
We used to, defunct, but were you...
Yes, it's now defunct, but The Split is right. That's the right title.
Correct, yeah. And all the episodes are still there. We did, 60 or so episodes reviewing young adult books every week. And it was, you learn a lot from that, and voice was one of the things. But anyway, yes, back to you.
Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to say specifically what that was in case anyone is, got to go find that and give it a listen. Okay, so the first thing I want to address is this notion of that first person is the closest point of view possible. I actually titled one of the sections in the point of view book, Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, is first person the closest point of view of all.
Right.
Because guess what? It's not. It is equally close as a close third point of view that embodied in the point of view character.
Yep.
So the difference between a first person point of view and a close third person point of view is that in first person, the character also functions as the narrator, and in third person, the narrator is a different entity, whether that's the author or an author, so it's complicated. But so to keep it simple tonight, different person, same person functioning as narrator. However, in the first person point of view, unless you're writing in first person present tense, which is what makes it so challenging, you need to have your character split into two people. So there's the character who's the doer on the stage of the page, the now character acting in the plot. And then there's the character from a future point in time telling the story to the reader. So even in first person, you still have a narrator with distance and perspective and hindsight and maturity. That can be a narrow gap or a great gap, depending on your chronological distance between narrator and character. So you set yourself a great challenge going for first person present tense,
Yes, I mean, it's interesting because at least the reader's going to know, well, the character didn't die. And this was the interesting thing about all of the criticism of the third book in the Divergent series is that, spoiler, the author switches, it's been first person point of view from one character's first person present tense the whole way through. And regardless of whether you think it's a great book or not, or whether it's well written or not, in the third book, all of a sudden, bang, there's a male character in there with first person present tense point of view. You go, why has she done that in the third book? Well, there's a very good reason for that, and it may have something to do with the demise of the certain other person. Because it's pretty hard to finish the book
if your narrator's dead.
Pointed at my head. Yeah, that's right. It's a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
I think I haven't written much in first person. I think it's mostly just because the genres that I like to read in are primarily third person genres. And I don't know why that is. I think I would probably have a lot of fun writing in first person because you do get to go so deep into the character. I mean, you get to do the same thing in the third person, but having that immediate access to emotions is intriguing, and to be able to really speak with the voice of the character immediately in that moment. You can do it with the past tense, obviously you have that distance still. But I mostly write in third person a little more limited. So having that first person is just like a barrier I haven't crossed yet. I've never done it.
Right. Well, and again, I think it's so interesting that people assume that if we're in first person, we're getting a more emotive experience on the page, but that's not true. There are a lot of first-person stories where the character really isn't a good narrator. Not every character can tell his own story. And, what you lose by having a first-person narrator when it's not a character who functions well as a narrator is a sense of perspective and scope. The story starts feeling myopic, like you can only see what's right in front of this character's face. And you miss out on a lot of the world, the action, the drama, stuff happening around and beyond when that character as narrator isn't able to pull back, which is why we need the narrator to be at a different point in space and time so that you can sort of look back and say, I now realize I have learned, I see this, and kind of play with the boundaries of perspective by showing things that the character doing might not really even be aware of.
Right.
And at the same time, you're walking the tightrope of playing by the rules of what can this character tell the reader, because the character's not omniscient. What was it like writing your novel in the first person present tense? Were you aware of those challenges, or was it all just very natural for you?
No, I was very aware of it. And then when I went back to do revision, I found there were places where I'd slipped into past tense as well, and they used occasionally past verbs. So clearly it wasn't my normal flow of thinking. So I had to do a lot of translating. It's when you get in the flow of it, though, and in particular, more recently now I'm doing dictating. It's fabulous for that. It's really good for that because obviously you're speaking as if you're yourself. So there's some advantages to that point of view, I think, in some mechanics of writing. But that aside, I found it extremely challenging, particularly when it comes to setting up suspense and fast-paced plots and not being able to reflect anything about the antagonist's moves, which often I've done in the past when I've been doing third-person past and multiple points of view. So it definitely drives the story. There's no question. It's going to help drive the story in a particular way, I think.
Right. I think that's true. And again, the caveat is if you've got a character who can function as a narrator, and yours does. Indy is a really qualified narrator. She shows us the lay of the land. She tells us who's on the stage of the page and who's doing what. And we never suffer clarity because we're in her head looking at the world through her eyes, or because we're in the present tense and we can only know what she knows up to this point in her life. We can't know anything with hindsight, which for anyone who hasn't tried writing in first-person present tense, these can be really fun challenges to take on. And I would say start with stories and free writing and see if it's fun and see if a character comes to life for you. And then if it does, you might have the makings of a book there,
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of play around first before you commit to like 300 pages of of anything. But
that's the only time I've ever written in first person is when I'm doing like sketches or prompts or just like thoughts. Right. And a lot of times that's because what I'll get is the voice of a character, and so I'll just give them the ability to speak. And then once they've gone and spoken and given me their perspective on things, then I tend to like take it and then solidify it and then change the entire point of view.
Right. So, yeah. Yeah.
It is really good for getting to know your character and your character's voice. I think as an exercise, I like to use it because it does, I feel like, separate me from the character a little differently than when I'm writing in third person, because I really do get to just like hear them speaking a little bit differently.
Right. And voice is such a great aspect of storycraft. And so, you know, if you're writing in the first person, you should expect to not be yourself. You need this character to have a unique voice that suits the character, that's going to be consistent in the narrative as well as the dialogue. So you can't have an authorial voice if your character is like really, you know, street punk or something. you're going to have a huge disconnect there in the first person. But if your first person narrator is much older, say 20 years have passed, all of those life experiences and different education levels or different career paths should be reflected in the narrative voice. So then when you construct your narrator, you aren't thinking about yourself or, you know, the omniscient concept of God on high. You've got to really think, who is this person now at the point of telling this story? At the end of the character arc, plus however many years, versus who is this character now acting in the story, going through the struggles of the plot. So how did Indy come to life for you, Robert, as you were developing that voice?
I can't, it'd be pretty hard to be specific about that. I honestly don't know. I had in mind, you know, a kind of a street smart young woman who didn't mind scrapping, but had high morals. And more than that, I don't know that I really thought about it much. I wanted to start. What's the phrase? In medias res. I just wanted to write. Yeah, I just wanted to get right into some action, and a little bit like what Kathryn was saying, just to find the voice. And that's why I decided to write the short story when I was invited to write a short story for an anthology. I thought, okay, this is my chance to see if I can express this voice first, and then find a character for that. And she just came on the paper, and it's just arrived. So
came alive.
Yeah. So exactly what you were just saying. Really, you know, you find that there's a story in there.
Yeah, definitely. Now, you two have both read a lot of YA and new adult fiction. So do you find with all of these first-person narratives that the voices start to sound the same from one book to another, that people are just going into sort of, my character is between 16 and 24, and this is first person? You know, do they get kind of generic after a while?
You go first, Kathryn.
Silence.
Yes and no. I think there are definite character traits that can help define the voice that a lot of young adult and new adult books are going for right now, that does make it a little bit redundant in terms of like the angst or the emotional wave that things are going, or the proponent for having strong female characters that all have very similar ways of being strong, sarcasm and you know, things that create almost a path where you can't get too far from each other's voices because you're trying too hard to be very similar characters. But there are some books that, I mean, if you could really define an individual rather than just this character archetype that they kind of take and then shift a little bit, then you can get some really good and really interesting characters out of that. They don't all have to be the same, but there is kind of a tendency to adopt the same character traits, which doesn't help you create an individual voice.
Right.
Yeah, there's definitely some emulation going on, I think, in that particular YA market. Well, I personally think that the reason why the first person, and in particular present tense, I think has really struck a chord is, if you look at middle grade, YA, new adult, and then general adult fiction, there are probably identification with it at the different reader ages. So even though a lot of adults read YA, I believe that the overriding principle of YA is, who am I in this world? That's really, whereas middle grade, for example, is we want to save the earth, we want superheroes, we want people to, parent characters to look up to effectively, but super parents. Because that's what we still believe in when we're 8 to 12. But you get past that and you get to age 16, you might still be with family, or you might, you're not of age. There are, in many countries, there are things you still can't do legally. And so there's a inner question of who am I? And I think that's what that point of view can address so well. I'm not saying the other point of view can't, but it definitely can help capture that. And I've certainly felt that when reading some of the better ones. Who, oh my God, so here I am saying, oh my God, it was like I was there, man. So
right.
It's as if you are. It's as if you are that angsty teen. And I think that's what attracts adults as well, is that somehow you're sort of still reliving that part of you that still wants to find who you are. That still maybe even still wants to be young and experiencing first romance, first kiss, or first trouble in the world. But the differences that can exist. One of the best books I read was All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. Have you read that, Kathryn?
No, I have not.
It's I think that's the one. It's fantastic because it's dual POV. Both first person, both present tense. I'm pretty sure they're present tense. One male, one female. And the difficulty, I think, as I referred to, say, with Divergent, one of the issues in the last book is that neither voice sounds particularly different. So the male POV that she introduces sounds just like the whiny female that you've been following for 2.5 books. So it's a bit tricky. So she gets around it by having them labelled as chapters, with the person's name at the top of the chapter, so you know who it is you're supposed to be reading. In All the Bright Places, the voices are so different that you immediately know whose head you're in. And it's fantastic. It's a great experience, and it's a deep book. It has themes of suicide in there, and so one of those characters is an unreliable narrator as well. So you don't really ever find out what's deep in his head. You get hints of it.
Right.
And the two are in a relationship. So it's highly recommended if you want to explore first-person POV, done really well with all perspectives.
Cool. We'll put that in the show notes. And I like what you were saying about the voices being too similar. If you are writing multiple first-person points of view, you had better make sure... especially within the same book, not necessarily over, your different publications, but make sure those voices are so distinct from each other that a reader knows whose head they're in without being told. That's how you know that you have succeeded. Because if your characters sound the same, then... sorry, that's a craft failure. A really great example of multiple first-person point of view is The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. She's got 4 sisters who share the story. They each have points of view, and they're separated by chapter. And then the mother has a few chapters, but it's mainly the 4 sisters. So they are living in the same family, raised by the same parents, living through the same experiences in this household. They're actually in the jungles of the Congo because they're a missionary family. The same religion, the same physical resources in their life. So all of those variables are controlled for, and yet they have 4 very distinct voices. Who's talking by the way they describe things, by their syntax, by their attitudes. All of that stuff comes off the page. So there you go. On that note, I think we're going to wrap up.
I can't even imagine writing it.
Yeah. Well, there's an interview at the back of the book, and I think it's been a while since I read it, but I think Kingsolver said she wrote every chapter from all 4 points of view and then picked the best one for that scene to go in the book. So it's a big book, and then she basically wrote it 4 times, and there's one, but I think maybe 2 pivotal events where you get the action from 2 or 3 of the sisters, maybe even 4, because it's such a huge event. And as a reader, I just gobble it up. I want to know what each of the sisters is experiencing in this moment. It was so incredible. And I know she said when she was writing it, she called it the DAB, that damn Africa book, because it was just such a huge project. But
I was going to say, it takes dedication to do that. Wow.
Yes, definitely. All right, so any other final thoughts on first-person point of view? All right.
I'd say if you haven't had a go, then it's worth it to expand your authorial capacity. Whether you do it actually as part of a novel, or whether you do it as Kathryn does, as simply precursor or writing around to better understand the character.
Right. Well, as I always say, my caveat is play around first. Like you did, Robert. You wrote a story that you actually published in an anthology, so you knew it was tested. You knew that voice would work for you and would find readers. And that is such a great way to go about it, because changing the point of view of a novel is such painstaking work. Nobody wants to do it. So start short and then grow. Play to your strengths. Why would you struggle with your weaknesses when you can dabble? When it works, grow it, Or
you
just
can
make
be
life
like
easier.
Lee Child. He writes Jack Reacher from either third person or first person and doesn't care which one. He says it depends on the story. Pretty cool, right?
There you go. If you can get away with it, go for it.
Exactly.
Right. All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. You can find all of our episodes at wordessential.com/Storyworks Roundtable. And while you're online, head over to Facebook, go to the Storyworks Writers Group, and let us know about your first-person projects. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.